She puts the wow, yum into words. It's the Lafayette food junkie herself on News Talk 96.5 KPEL.
Welcome back to the Lafayette Food Junkie Show on News Talk 96.5 KPEL. I'm your host, Tiffiany, and joining me now is Kaitlynn and Scott with Cultured Guru. They are based out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, but they've been coming to the Lafayette Farmers Market, so you can check them out every Saturday over there. We had a little geek out moment during the commercial break about chai tea.
We did.
Kaitlynn is apparently a big fan of chai tea.
A huge lover of chai tea.
And then I was also telling her that I wanted to speak to them to walk me through the store to let me know what exactly they put in it so I can make it at home, but that I have too much tea at home right now. You said you also have the same problem.
I do. I work at my day job is at a tea shop, a Red Stick Spice Company, and we sell loose leaf tea, and I just have tea coming out of my ears, basically.
And I won't lie, I haven't been much of a tea drinker in the past, but my tea has definitely been increasing ever since she's been working there.
He's catching on to the tea love.
It's definitely spilling over to me too.
Okay, so Cultured Guru, what is it, and how did you guys get the start?
So Cultured Guru is our fermented foods business. It actually started out as a blog about microbiology. So fermented foods is a subset of the subject of microbiology. You're using microbes to preserve a food in a very delicious way. So we started this blog called Microbial Universe, and it was our passion project. So Scott really loved photography, and I loved microbiology. And so we graduated from LSU, him in digital advertising, and myself with a degree in microbiology. And we kind of wanted an outlet for our passions in our field that we weren't exactly finding in careers. And we said, let's blog.
Yeah, so we took this blog, and basically what we wanted to do with it was take scientifically backed information and kind of pair it with professionally shot photos, because everyone loves to look at food pictures on Instagram, and we're always taking pictures of our food, but we wanted to do it in a way that showed that fermented foods could be just as beautiful as your regular food, and that there's really nothing to be scared about as far as fermented foods goes.
Right. And for us, there's lifestyle blogging, and there's food blogging, and then there's science blogging. And quite frankly, science blogging is kind of ugly. It's not exactly the prettiest thing in the world. And so that's where my mind was at. I wanted to science blog. And then pairing up with him just made it beautiful in a way that hasn't been done before.
I have to say that I follow you guys on social media, and y'all have done a really good job of making fermented foods sexy.
I love hearing that.
Well, thank you.
And that's with things like Instagram and Facebook, and that's the ultimate goal is you want to make it look very appealing to the eyes, so people will want to go out and get it and learn more about it. Fermenting is so popular right now. Why do you think that is?
So you have your food trends, and then you have your food that's here to stay. So, there's a lot of food trends. I think one of them right now is donuts. And then I'm sure people will be like, donuts cause heart disease and it'll fade out, unfortunately. But with fermented foods, what you're getting is this whole realm of scientific evidence that says you need certain microbes to live in your gut and your intestines, in your microbiome, if you will, which is just your ecosystem of microorganisms in your body. And you need them for health. You need them for proper digestion, gut health, mental health, skin health, basically all health. And so with all this evidence that's coming from sequencing the human microbiome to studying microbes further and doing things like genome sequencing, which just tells you every little tiny thing that's living in a certain ecosystem, all of that is saying that this is what you need. So here's this food that tastes good. You're preserving vegetables in a delicious way. So you're doing something that's sustainable, something that tastes good, and something that's completely necessary for your health. So, it's catching on because of all of those things combined.
And then you were telling me before the show, so I kept saying pickling, and you guys were like, we don't pickle, we ferment. So what is the difference between pickling something and fermenting something?
Yeah, so when you're pickling something, you're generally using vinegar and sugar to kind of do that preservation of the vegetable. And so when you ferment something, you're just using salt and water.
Okay.
And so all of our products are very limited ingredient, meaning we just have salt, water, and then the produce. And then like in our kimchi or our pickles, we do add like a
organic
certain
spice
to it. But I mean, that's it. That's all that's in there. And so people who are watching their sugar can really rest assured that, there's nothing there.
There's not all those extra ingredients.
Yeah,
and so,
exactly.
Fermenting, what we're doing is we're creating an environment for specific kinds of bacteria to thrive. And those bacteria produce lactic acid by using up plant sugars. And that lactic acid preserves the vegetable versus in pickling, you're adding, like he said, hot vinegar and sugar to sterilely preserve a food. So you're getting a living food versus something that's been sterilely preserved with added acid.
Okay, that's I got it now.
Yeah.
And I was reading the ingredients, so I did Whole30 a while back, and this is very Whole30 approved.
Yeah,
so.
his mom did Whole30, and she said our fermented foods are definitely on the list.
Yeah, I know, because they warn you about everything, and you get so used to reading every single ingredient. And I was like, oh, that I definitely can have. And we're talking about that fermenting is kind of having a moment, but it's not a new concept. I mean, this has been going on for ages. This is how people originally preserved foods.
Right.
I mean, every culture has some sort of fermented food. We were talking about that before the show too.
Yeah. And so, in Korea, you'll find kimchi, and there's over 200 kinds. So all over Asia, they eat kinds of kimchi. And depending on the region, depends on what vegetables, what produce, what spices go into there. Germany, sauerkraut, Poland, sauerkraut. So America is kind of having their renaissance of fermentation, I guess you could say. They're kind of taking these ancient ways of preserving food and realizing that it's needed for health. Something that we're doing differently, though, is providing the science behind it. So, in ancient times, when they were salting their vegetables, they didn't realize that it was tiny organisms that are doing it for them. They're not necessarily fermenting, but the microorganisms are. So we're taking that, scientific information, and we're making fermentation new, I guess you could say.
Exactly. And then in a fermented food, you have acid-tolerant probiotic bacteria in there. And the thing that's so important about that is, if you're, drinking a kombucha maybe, or if you're buying a oral tablet from the store, those probiotics may not necessarily be making it through your stomach acid and into your digestive system is where you actually need those.
Right. And in here, those microbes, those lactobacillus, those probiotic bacteria that are listed on our nutrition panels, they are adapt to survive at a pH as low as 1 for 2 hours. And so, food doesn't usually stay in your stomach for longer than 30 minutes to an hour, and it's a pH of 2. So they're definitely going to make it through. So you have these really healthy, diverse group of microorganisms that make it to your gut. And it's amazing to take an ancient process and show people the science behind it and bring them on board to this cool food trend.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to ask you too. You see so many probiotic products on the market, like there's the yogurts, which I was under the impression that yogurt already had bacteria in it, but now they have, the gut health antibiotics, they have the supplements that you can take. How can somebody kind of weed through all of this and decide, what's kind of just nothing and then what's really going to help your health?
So what I always tell people is that when you're looking for something that's probiotic, something to help your gut health, something with live active cultures, what you want to look for is a long list of the Latin names of bacteria. So that's when you'll see those things that say L.lactis or L.acidophilus. Those are names of bacteria. They're abbreviations, and it just stands for Lactobacillus acidophilus. And so the longer the list, the better. The key to gut health is having a very rich microbiome. And so species richness means the number of different species present. And so what we always tell people to look for is look for the most rich you can find. And so in an oral supplement, to get a list like the one you would find on our kimchi or our sauerkraut, you would pay probably $60 to $80 for a month's supply.
Wow.
For that rich. And that's because those microbes are grown up in a lab and then processed in a dry form to put into a capsule. And that costs money to do. Versus wild fermenting, where all those microbes are already present on produce. We're just creating the perfect environment for them.
Exactly.
So when you're shopping around for foods that do list the cultures that are present, just look for a really long list, and that's going to be the higher quality.
Yeah. And generally in a fermented food, you'll find about 20 times more probiotic bacteria in the food than you would in a probiotic capsule or anything like that. And essentially, it's calorie-free, too. And so it's
versus
excellent,
a dairy.
Yeah, it's excellent way for people who have certain diet paths and, can only eat certain things. It's a great way to introduce and keep that probiotic, the probiotics just like running through your system.
Right.
Do you think that some of the popularity is too that the amount that we overtake antibiotics in our society, and it kind of wipes out the good and bad bacteria in the gut, and then this is a way for people to kind of replenish that? Do you think that that's also given way to the popularity of fermented foods?
Most definitely. And that's another one of the reasons that it's not just a food trend and it's here to stay, is because we're coming out of this golden age of antibiotics. Antibiotic resistance is here, and there's even microorganisms, strains of E. coli that can resist every antibiotic that's currently developed by pharmaceutical companies, which is quite scary.
Yeah.
I mean, what that means is that people, can die from urinary tract infections, or things that we could have cured 20 years ago with penicillin. We no longer can, because these microbes have adapted to live in the presence of antibiotics. So, your next thing that we're going to turn to is probiotics. And the premise is that you're going to populate your gut microbiome with all of these healthy, awesome bacteria that do great things for you. And so if the region of your intestines is populated with all of this, they're going to fight for their territory. Yeah. So, if you have that E. coli or a different food poisoning bacteria passing through, they have to compete for space.
Okay.
So it's kind of like you have this little army, this little village living in your gut, and they're going to protect their home. So it's preventative medicine, I guess you could say. And it's necessary, because without antibiotics and the fact that they're kind of phasing out, we need something else. And a healthy gut microbiome is key.
Yeah.
So what are the different products that you guys offer?
So we offer 3 products right now. Our fermented kimchi, our fermented sauerkraut, and our fermented dill pickles. And so we do all of our fermenting in 30-gallon oak wooden barrels. We wanted to keep the process as natural as possible, but we didn't necessarily want to use crocks and bury our stuff into the ground.
Right.
So our barrels are just whiskey barrels. They're uncharred, though, on the inside, so we could kind of inoculate our own microbial community within the barrel. That's, very, very important. And also the oak allows for the tannins in the wood to, kind of incorporate themselves into the vegetables so that they stay very crispy and very, very fresh.
Yeah. So a lot of people who try our foods, they say, it's crunchy, it tastes fresh, it's a lot more crisp than other fermented vegetables I've tried, and it's the way in which we ferment our products that allows that.
And so we ferment our sauerkraut and our kimchi for about 4 weeks, and then we ferment our dill pickles for about 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And we should also say that you guys try to use as much as possible locally sourced vegetables.
Yeah. So we try to source as local as possible, and local means a 400-mile radius. And so most recently we've been getting produce from Mississippi. It's actually quite hard for us to find pickling cucumbers here. But fun times, we've been talking with our farmers market neighbors, Prudhomme City Farms, and possibly in the works getting them to grow some stuff for us. So it would be super local, and we're very excited about that.
Yeah.
But we would rather run out of a product than source from Mexico or something. So we're actually currently out of pickles.
Yeah.
But that's okay. We'd rather keep our local practice than venture out.
Because we started this whole business on morals. pickles. We want our company to be a sustainable company. We want our company to be good for the environment. We're very much environmentalists, I guess you could call ourselves. I mean, we stockpile our recycles in our apartment so that we can drive to a certain place and recycle them instead of just throwing them in the trash. And
so we kind of took that. Whenever we started our business, we took what we liked and, our beliefs and what we wanted to do with this. We didn't want it to just be making money. We wanted it to mean something, and that local produce means a lot to us. So hopefully we can get some from really local people.
Yes. So for the listeners at home, because I just learned this before the show, the difference between a regular cucumber and a pickling cucumber.
Right. So when you're fermenting or pickling, you're going to want to use a pickling cucumber to make pickles. Fermenting especially because those microbes are breaking down sugars to produce lactic acid. If you're using a slicing cucumber, it gets kind of soggy. And that's because there's a higher water content in slicing or salad cucumbers, they call them. A pickling cucumber will have a thicker skin, and the water content inside is a little lower. So when we add our specific salt concentrations and then the tannins in the wood in our barrels, we're able to keep a crisp pickle. Mm-hmm.
What cannot be fermented?
The unfermentables. So off the top of my head, there's 3 that I refuse to ferment, and that's tomatoes, beets, and broccoli. I'll let Scott tell the story of the beets, which would also be apply to tomatoes. But the reason we don't ferment broccoli is because it smells horrendous.
I can imagine.
Fermented broccoli is the most disgusting smell ever. Yeah. And, smell and taste go hand in hand. Right. So I find that it probably wouldn't be enjoyable to eat if it stinks so bad. So definitely not broccoli, but I'll let him tell the story of why you can't ferment beets.
Yeah, so when we first started, we actually had a blog called Microbial Universe. And so that was strictly just like pretty photos and recipes. And so we were trying to rack our brains on like what different recipes we could do, because we had a sauerkraut already and we had some of the other things that we were doing. We were like, well, let's try our hand at fermenting a fruit. And so we tried.
Beets, and a root vegetable. So we were trying a few different things. And beets we went to the farmer's market, and they're so pretty, So we were like, definitely this will make for great photos.
Yes. And so we got into the fermentation process, and they were done, right? They were finished fermenting.
Right. Well, we check everything under the microscope. And so to see the process of fermentation, which we can talk about later, and so while I was checking them, I noticed that they were stuck in what I would call stage 2. There were these microbes that just wouldn't go away, and they're supposed to go away.
Yes.
And they're actually alcohol fermenting microbes.
So we were essentially making our own moonshine there for a second.
I thought it would get out of it, so we were just letting it continue. And then I was like, well, let me taste it and see what's going on in here. And when I opened it, it smelled like rubbing alcohol.
Yes.
Did you taste it or no?
I tasted it, and it tasted like moonshine. And so you can't ferment beets because the sugar content is so high. So it selects for a yeast fermentation, which is alcohol fermentation, versus, in a vegetable like cabbage or cucumbers, you're going to get lactic acid fermentation. Moral of the story, don't ferment beets at home.
Unless you want to make moonshine.
Unless you want to maybe get drunk, not suggesting you do that, though.
My parents are in Kentucky right now, and they got their hands on some homemade moonshine. And one person that's selling it is selling right now watermelon moonshine. And I really want to taste it.
I would try that.
I'm really curious as to what that tastes like. And then we also want to mention... you can't, for that same reason, fermenting fruits is because it'll turn to alcohol.
Yeah, fruits, tomatoes, that sugar content. If you're looking to make a probiotic fermented vegetable, you want to stick to vegetables besides broccoli. And then you want to stray from fruits or high sugar content. Even if you're doing something like a carrot, I would suggest adding cabbage in with it. And if you're interested in fermenting at home, we have lots of how-to recipes on our blog.
All right, we are going to take another break, and when we come back, we have more with Kaitlynn and Scott with Cultured Guru. So come back to us. It's the Lafayette Food Junkie Show on News Talk 96.5 KPEL. Welcome back to the Lafayette Food Junkie Show on News Talk 96.5 KPEL. I'm your host, Tiffiany Deku, and Kaitlynn and Scott with Cultured Guru has been tonight's guest co-host. You can find them every Saturday at the Lafayette Farmers Market. Why don't you take us through the process of fermentation?
Okay, so, a lot of the fermentation information out there leaves it at, add a tablespoon of salt to some vegetables and let it sit for a week. But it's a lot more complicated than that. We're not fermenting. Microbes are actually fermenting. So we have to focus on them. And so the process goes, you add a specific salt concentration to vegetables. And that salt concentration comes from where the produce grows in relation to the ground. So low-growing vegetables like cabbage, you would add a 2.5% salt by weight of cabbage. And so once we add that salt, a brine is formed. What happens is the water is drawn out of the cabbage, and that starts fermentation. And it happens in 3 stages. So stage 1 is when oxygen-using microbes are still present. And these could be potential pathogens, yeasts, anything that's going to utilize oxygen for its metabolic processes. And what happens is they're going to actually use up all the oxygen and actually make the environment unlivable for themselves. And they kill themselves off that way. So once all the oxygen's gone, you now have an anaerobic, salty environment. And so naturally living on produce, what can survive in that environment is called leuconostoc bacteria. And that's going to be stage 2 of fermentation. And what happens in that stage is a lot of bubbles. So leuconostoc bacteria, they're heterolactic fermenters, which means they make a little bit of lactic acid, a little bit of acetic acid, and a lot of carbon dioxide. And they make so much of that stuff, they self-limit. Actually killing themselves off. So when you're fermenting at home and things, stage 2 is when, you'd have to burp a jar, which would be just loosening the lid a little bit, letting some of that gas build up out. And throughout this process, especially on stage 2, you have to make sure everything's staying submerged in that brine that's been created, because that's the oxygen-free environment under the liquid. So we always say below the brine, it's fine. So make sure it's below the brine. And then so stage 2 is going to happen, that carbon dioxide builds up, and then it's going to subside because those leuconostoc bacteria are dying off. And that's going to lead way into stage 3. So now you have an oxygen-free environment, slightly acidic, salty. And so living on the surface of produce, the things that thrive in that environment are lactobacillus, which are going to be our probiotic species of bacteria. So by stage 3, which usually takes about 2.5 weeks to get there if you're fermenting at a kind of cold temperature like we do. And they're going to just make lactic acid. So they're going to be so happy in there, they're going to start fermenting those plant sugars. And those can be things like various things like arabinose and things like that. And they're just going to break them down and then end up with lactic acid. And that lactic acid buildup is what's going to preserve the vegetable. So it's not necessarily the salting or the fact that you just threw it on the counter for the week with some salt. It's that process that gets you there. And that you have to let that process ensue. And the way we do that process I just described is called wild fermenting and bacterial succession. You're letting them succeed in population until you reach a stage with just desirable organisms. And then those desirable organisms populate so much that they've acidified the environment and they protect the environment, kind of like probiotics colonizing your gut, like I talked about earlier, protecting their home. They're going to protect that home, that food, from potential pathogens just by being there and by making that environment acidic. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what goes on in the process of fermentation.
So there's a lot of fear that comes from fermenting at home. I made my first kimchi a while back, and I was terrified that I was going to kill everyone with it because it was just the whole idea of just putting something on your counter to essentially rot for 2 weeks was terrifying to me. And yeah, it didn't come out right, but it did not kill anyone. But there is a lot of fear around fermentation.
Right.
You want to kind of dispel some of the fear.
Yeah. And so that fear comes from, a lot of that information I talked about online. So, if you Google how to ferment foods or something, you end up with a recipe that just says, put salt in it, leave it on your counter for a week without that background information. So there's no explanation of why you're doing that. Normally, our thought process is it's not in the fridge, it's not in the freezer, it's not pickled or preserved already, then it's rotting, it's going to go bad. So that's where that fear comes from. And there's a necessary fear, too, because improper fermentation can be dangerous. So a lot of that, leaving it on the counter a week, you don't give that bacterial succession process time to actually occur. So proper fermenting is necessary. And that's why we kind of consider ourselves educators in our field. We want to remove that fear. And so we don't just sell fermented foods. We have a blog that we post our exact sauerkraut recipe online. The one that you can buy in our little pretty jars is the one on our blog that you can make at home. And it's because in order to remove fear, people have to know every stage that went into a product, why it's safe, and why we're qualified to say that it's safe. And so I'm a microbiologist, and we check every batch of our fermented foods under a microscope. That's the most affordable way to do it. There's a lot of technologies now that you can use, but they're very, very expensive. And so we look at them in all the stages, and that allows us to produce accurate timelines to post on our blog. And that's our timelines of fermentation. So when stage 1 is occurring, when stage 2 is occurring, as long as you're following our recipe. And that's kind of how we're removing the fear. That doesn't really happen in a lot of other fermentation blogs. They don't talk about the microbes. They just say, here, this is good for you, just do it. And for a lot of people, inquisitive people really into food, that's not enough. There has to be a why present. And we're really focused on providing that.
Yeah, I won't lie. I was one of those people when Kaitlynn first came to me with this idea to sell fermented foods to the public. I was just like, all I know about them is bacteria's in it.
Yeah.
And then everything we're taught is bacteria is bad. We're probably the cleanest society we've ever been right now, where we put antibacterial soap on our hands. We use Germ-X all the time. I mean, not people, outside of stores, have these little wipes that you're just wiping down every single thing. And it's like, not all of those bacteria are bad for you.
Most of them are actually good.
Yeah. And so after Kaitlynn broke everything down for me, I was convinced. I was like, it makes so much sense. And, we laugh with people and tell people if you want a healthy microbiome on your skin and inside your gut, you need to embrace the microbes. Go get a dog, let it roll around in the dirt, and then love on your dog,
We tell people to do things like succulent gardening because that's what we love to do. We have a little obsession there. Playing with our dog outside. We like to go on walks and look for lichens. So it's not just in food that we try to remove the fear. It's kind of in all of the world because microbes are all around us and we should embrace them.
Yeah. And now necessarily, you need to be clean and you need to have good hygiene. And
right, don't necessarily go lick the parking lot ground or something. But kind of rein in that whole fear, that whole get rid of all microbes.
Yeah.
So if somebody decides to ferment at home, what are some warning signs that things have gone terribly wrong?
So warning signs, I always tell people to get some pH strips. They're really cheap on Amazon. So if you're fermenting at home, you can check the pH dropping. So you want to look for a pH drop. Color. If you're just starting out fermenting, don't ferment red cabbage. What you want to look for is things like a brown color or magenta color. And that means that your ferment could be going bad. You can't really see that if you're fermenting purple cabbage.
Right.
And
the smell.
So you want something that smells pleasantly sour. Something that you're going to smell and you're going to say...
rot smell.
Right.
Because you will know.
You'll know. Your body has this innate sense of smell that we kind of forget that we're animals and we can smell things, and that smell is telling us something. So if you pop open your ferment and you're like, wow, that is repulsive, you probably shouldn't eat it. You're going to want something that's pleasantly sour. It'll be a step down from a vinegar smell. Vinegar kind of tingles your nose when you smell it. Lactic acid, fermented properly in vegetables, it smells just pleasantly sour, but you're not going to get that nose tingle. It's more smooth.
Yeah. Okay.
So look for those things. And then if you're looking for a recipe, I would say check out our website, definitely. It's just cultured.guru. And see who's writing the blog or the recipe, see credibility. What gives that person the ability to provide that information to you?
All right, we are going to take our last break, and when we come back, we have more with Kaitlynn and Scott with Cultured Guru. So come back to us. It's the Lafayette Food Junkie Show on News Talk 96.5 KPEL.
Burgers Acadiana has to offer. It's the Lafayette Food Junkie Show on News Talk 96.5 KPEL.
Welcome back to the Lafayette Food Junkie Show on News Talk 96.5 KPEL. I'm your host, Tiffiany Deku, and we've been talking with Kaitlynn and Scott of Cultured Guru, a fermented product company out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Really quickly, something that sets your kimchi apart is traditionally kimchi has fish sauce in it, and yours does not.
Right.
Indeed. Mm-hmm. So when we went about making our kimchi recipe, we were not really fans of like the fish stuff that you usually find in it. And we also wanted to create a product that, if you were a vegan or a vegetarian, or if you had a certain diet path, we wanted you to be able to enjoy it. Mm-hmm. So we had removed all the meat product from it, and we substituted with kelp granules.
Right.
Because we kind of figured that vegetable from the sea was a little bit more tolerable than maybe some of the other ingredients you usually find in traditional kimchi.
Yeah, it lends a more mild flavor as well as making it friendly for all diet paths.
Indeed. Mm-hmm. And then also traditional kimchi is usually very, very hot. And so we kind of toned back our spice a little bit. So you definitely get it on the tail end, but it's not so much in your face. Mm-hmm. And so between those two changes, we've really received some very good reviews of it. And, people who traditionally don't like kimchi very much tend to like ours a
which
good
is pretty
bit,
cool.
Which is a very big compliment for us.
Mm-hmm. So you guys are based out of Baton Rouge. What made you want to make the trek weekly to Lafayette to go to the farmer's market here?
Yeah, so another farmer's market vendor, Ashley Savoy.
Yeah, she does Grinning Jupiter jams at the farmer's market.
Yeah, and so when we were trying to pick a market to choose to, sell at, she has always had excellent things to say about the market at the horse farm. And she says that, she does very well each week. And, it was just something that just kind of clicked with her. And so before we made a commitment, we drove out here one weekend and just visited it. And I mean, if you haven't been to the horse farm, you just need to go. It is beautiful out there. It's so big and it's so, lush and green. And, the vendors at that farmer's market are so diverse.
And they're so welcoming too. They're very nice people.
Yeah. And so you'll have things from, natural dog treats to one of our friends now, Sapavela Soaps. He makes his own soap.
It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and so we emailed Mark like Friday night, and we had gotten an email back from him on Monday morning. And the turnaround was so quick, and he just had told us that he thinks that fermented foods is something that their market is lacking, and he thinks the consumers would really, really open up to the idea of having fermented foods in the market. And we have seen that ourselves now that we've been there for a few months. And all the vendors were so welcoming to us. And to just come into a community where you don't live and just have them welcome you with open arms has been
nice.
So nice.
What has been your bestseller?
Our kimchi,
definitely.
By far. People love that stuff.
Yeah, and so at the market, you can actually barter with other vendors. And so often we're trading our kimchi for other cool stuff at the market, like soap, or I think I traded some pesto the other weekend.
Yeah.
So fun times.
Yeah, definitely.
So what are some things that you can do with your fermented products if somebody buys it and they're not exactly sure what to do with it?
Sure. So one of the things that we like to do with our kimchi and our sauerkraut is, eggs and rice. Such a simple thing. But
a cheap thing.
And it tastes so good. So, just make it like you normally would and then put your kimchi on top of that. But the key is not to cook the kimchi. You need to make sure you're eating it raw, because when you do cook it, you lose those probiotic microbes.
Okay, so that's good to know, because I've seen some recipes out there where you do actually cook with the kimchi. So when you do that, it takes out all the...
Right. And so, we have tons of ferments and stuff. Like we have one recipe about making sauerkraut bread. And so it's almost tastes like a sourdough bread, but it has sauerkraut in it. And so it's fun to use things like that, but the probiotics do die in the cooking process. So the best way to retain the health benefits is to add them after the heating process. So you can still add to soups and stews and things like a fried egg and rice, as long as you're adding them after the cooking process.
Okay.
Yeah. And so another thing that is our one of our favorites, we're smoothie fiends. I mean, we're always buying different fruits and different vegetables to blend in our in our blender to make excellent smoothies for the morning. And so we like to take our sauerkraut brine or our pickle brine and just take a teaspoon of it and put it into your smoothie or into an oatmeal bowl in the morning.
Sounds crazy, but...
Yeah, but it adds just the right amount of saltiness that you would actually look for in something that's kind of sweet. And other than that, I mean, it's essentially a calorie-free way to incorporate those probiotics into your diet.
We were talking about it's Memorial Day weekend, adding kimchi to a hamburger.
Oh, definitely. My dad, he is definitely a awesome griller. He's great at cooking all things on the grill. And he spent some time in Korea. And when I said I was going to make kimchi, I don't know if he was completely on board, but he definitely loves to put our kimchi on his hot dogs and hamburgers. So that's a really good idea for Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah, and if you don't feel like cooking at all, I mean, just eat it straight out the jar.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of people just come to us and say, we just eat it. And you know, that's good enough for us. We've even had people come and buy it for their dogs. We had, we had this one woman.
I have to say, my dog is on a strictly rice diet right now. I could not imagine her eating kimchi.
Yeah, okay, well, she was buying sauerkraut, but she was a regular. I mean, and she would say, oh, you know, my dog has just gone through your kraut in a week. And it's like her dog was just like, I'm just imagining her dog just like eating all this kraut out of the jar.
So when you're having a barbecue outside, put some on your burger and maybe toss the dog a little bit or something.
Yeah, definitely.
Everyone gets probiotics.
Memorial Day treat. So besides the farmer's market, where can people find your products in town?
So we just got into Sandra's Health Foods, and so you can find our sauerkraut there. We're working on some other stores here in Lafayette, but currently that's the only place in town you could get it. But if you ever find yourself in Baton Rouge, just Calandro's, Alexander's Highland Market, the Red Stick Spice Company, and we're even in Mint Health at the Woman's Hospital, which is a holistic medicine place.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah.
And then you guys recently did a beer dinner with Tin Roof where you made a sour beer, and I got super excited about that because that's the only kind of beer that I like. So tell us about these beers that you made.
Yeah, so we do pretty cool, fun stuff around Baton Rouge. So we paired up with Tin Roof to do a beer pairing, and they actually used our pickle brine as a source of lactobacillus to brew a sour beer. So there's a really cool guy there named Robbie, and he contacted us, and he was really awesome and brewed a beer using Louisiana strawberries, our pickle brine, and it came out pretty good. And we do some fun other local stuff. We pair up with Red Stick Spice Company to teach fermentation classes. So if you're interested in learning about fermenting sauerkraut or pickles or yogurt, that's a fun thing too.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming on tonight's show, guys. You did a great job, and I'm excited to try this kimchi that you brought me.
Yeah.
Do you guys see yourselves expanding into fermenting anything else in the future and adding it to your repertoire?
We do. We talk about it pretty often.
Yeah. We have a few different sauerkraut flavors that we're working on. Another big health thing right now is anti-inflammatory spices.
Yes.
And so we're thinking about a recipe incorporating turmeric into our sauerkraut.
Right. We have one on our blog, To Ferment at Home, turmeric sauerkraut, and it has received a lot of good feedback, and I love it. I've been eating it on everything, and so we're kind of venturing towards that for the next product.
Yeah, and we've even been playing around with some summer vegetables like squash and zucchini. We recently got a vegetable spiralizer, and so we've just been spiralizing like crazy lately, and we threw some squash and zucchini into a mason jar and fermented it, and it came out incredible.
Yeah, so if we could streamline that process, possibly fermented zucchini spirals could be fun.
Yeah.
Okay, stay tuned to see what else comes out. All right, that's our show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Join us next week at Sunday at 6 p.m. This is Tiffiany Daku on News Talk 96.5 KPEL, and this is the Lafayette Food Junkie Show. Thanks for listening, and as always, happy eating, Acadiana.